Flashlight off and back in his belt, he fed the rope through the carabiner until he was just above the dangerous-looking machine. He checked for a safe drop point and gently kicked himself away from the metal box. Swaying in the gap between two of the huge steel hulks, he let the rope slide through his fingers and caught it just before his feet hit the ground. The rope swayed just enough for his shoulder to clip the nearest machine's side. His body armor took the brunt of the impact, but it still hurt. He dropped the 6 inches to the concrete floor, freed the rope from his carabiner, and stepped away from the landing spot, the rifle in his hands and pointed forward. He clicked a button on its side, and a light below the barrel flashed into existence. "Givens, you're a go. Over." "Roger that." Perkins checked his 6 and then stood 3 meters away from where his partner would land. He played his light over the room, and a wide swath of the concrete floor shined. Perkins frowned. He walked forward, his light following the gleaming concrete. The trail led to what used to be a doorway. Scraps of what was once a wooden door lay scattered beyond the wrecked entryway. Whatever had come out of this room, it had been wider than the doorway and took most of the sheetrock and the studs with it. Perkins swallowed. Something creaked above him, but it didn't startle him. Givens was making his way down. For the first time in a long time, Perkins felt real fear. Anything that could crash through a heavy door and door jam like that was certainly powerful enough to kill a man outright. When he heard Givens' feet touch the floor, the sensation departed. "About time," he said softly. "Team Alpha's on the ground, over," Givens said behind him. Perkins remained with his weapon pointed at the large hole as Givens unclipped himself from the rope. "Acknowledged," Celian's voice said. "Any updates? Over." "Boss," Perkins said, "whatever came down here went through the door. Over." "Clarify. Over." "It took out the door and most of the doorway. Over." Givens walked up next to him. They traded a glance, and then both returned their eyes to the ruined doorway. "Be careful, Alpha. I want status every 5 minutes, and if something goes wrong, I want your asses back in this room and up that rope ASAP. Understood? Over." "Boss," the 2 men said in unison. "Good hunting. Over and out." Perkins gestured to the door with his rifle. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Givens nod. The lanky Kentuckian walked forward with silent steps, and Perkins let him get a meter ahead before following, his eyes constantly swiveling and looking for movement in the shadows. Far up ahead, a red emergency exit sign sputtered with dim light. Givens' rifle light stabbed out ahead of them and cut through the blackness like a knife. But the glow quickly gave way to shadow a mere 4 meters ahead. Beyond that, darkness swallowed it completely. Perkins kept his breathing quiet and steady even though his nerves sizzled with adrenaline. They'd done this before beneath a new moon in a tiny village. Only then, they'd had no lights at all, the 2 of them staring into darkness and moving across the desert floor with lethargic, careful steps. That time, they only had to worry about walking into the middle of a Sunni or Shiite militia. This time, their enemy was something they didn't even understand. Their lights parting the darkness, they continued down the hallway. Perkins' eyes flicked from one side to the other, noting the location of closed doors, but he was also looking for signs of whatever the hell came down here. The tile floor sparkled beneath their lights as though it had been freshly mopped. Givens stopped. Perkins watched him lift his head and sniff the air like a bloodhound. Then Perkins smelled it too, a mixture of rotting flesh and cooking meat. Givens raised a hand in a fist. Perkins waited. The Kentuckian was a hell of a tracker. His 6th sense for danger had kept their unit alive more than once, and if he raised his hand like that, Perkins knew well enough to obey the call for caution. The hallway ended up ahead and split into a wide open area much like the one they'd left. The difference was the shadows. It looked like there might be furniture in the room, and where there was furniture, there were likely to be, or have been, human beings. The pungent stench retreated. Givens' nose was much more sensitive than Perkins', but Givens seemed to relax as well. Whatever made that smell had moved on. Givens lowered his hand and pointed forward, and then he moved, one foot in front of the other, in complete silence. They reached the large room, and yes, there was furniture. Couches, chairs, some kind of waiting area. While Givens moved his rifle light to cover and examine the far wall, Perkins did the same to the sides. Destruction. That was the simplest way to put it. The couches and chairs had no fabric. The metal chairs were simple skeletons. The couches were little more than metal frames and springs. A clutter of gleaming staples, nails, and screws sat beneath their remains. On the west wall, Perkins saw a trio of wide metal shutters that ended at the floor. He trained his light above the shutters and saw several signs. Menus. This was the cafeteria. You mean this once was the cafeteria? Now it's just a junkyard. He turned in a slow circle looking for more signs. The LED beam caught the edge of something beige protruding from the wall. Another sign. He walked toward it and raised his light to fully illuminate it. The sign had the word security accompanied by an arrow pointing down an adjoining hallway. He tapped his foot softly on the tile floor. Givens stiffened slightly, and then turned to his partner, eyebrows raised. Perkins gestured to the sign. Givens looked up at it, and then nodded. As usual, the Kentuckian took point. They entered the hallway, and both stopped. Long, irregularly shaped gouges marred the cream-white walls. Exposed pipes, electrical wiring, and metal fasteners twinkled beneath their lights. Perkins looked up. Some of the tiles were missing. Whatever had eaten all the plastic, wood, and nuked the walls had even hit the ceiling. A shiver crawled up his spine. He did his best to ignore it, but the adrenaline had him more keyed up than he'd ever been in his life. A metal door stood 10 meters away at the end of the hall. They both knew what it was. The security offices. A camera mounted on the side had a single glowing red light. Perkins exhaled as softly as he could. Finally, they'd get some answers from the assholes that were supposed to protect the hospital staff and patients. They continued down the hall, their heads constantly swiveling to check for threats. When they neared the door, Givens stopped and tapped his throat mic twice. Celie-Ann, over. Givens tapped the mic another 3 times. Understood. Be careful. Over, the commander's voice said in their ears. Perkins grinned. Givens had told her they were at the objective and were about to engage unknown hostiles. Now it was time to figure out if anyone was in there. Givens sidestepped to the wall, Perkins crouching on the opposite side. They both duck-walked to either side of the door. It was a very old habit of theirs. Combatants, when cornered in a building, often shot through doors if they thought they heard a threat. And if you were standing in front of one when an AK opened up, chances were some of those bullets would end up in you. They didn't have anything to force open the door. Grenades might do it, but that was overkill. Givens held up his hand with 3 fingers. Perkins nodded. The fingers slowly disappeared into a closed fist, and then he pounded on the wall. Someone screamed inside the office, followed by the explosion of a bullet coming out of a barrel. The loud bang echoed in the hallway. Givens and Perkins exchanged a glance. "Stand down!" Perkins shouted. "Houston SWAT, open the door and slide your weapons out, now!" From inside the office, they heard the sounds of low conversation. "Is it out there?" a trembling male voice asked. "Houston SWAT, open the door, slide out your weapons, and come out with your hands up," Perkins bellowed. Another bout of conversation followed. Time stretched like taffy. Finally, the click of a lock disengaging, sounding much too loud, echoed in the hall. Perkins took a deep breath and held it. The door rattled a little and then squeaked open just enough to allow a hand through. It dropped a pistol in front of the door, and then another. "Open the door fully," Perkins said, "and then step back as far as you can. Do it now!" The door swung open. Whoever was in the room stepped back with loud, undisciplined steps. Perkins fought the urge to shake his head. Fuckers might as well be wearing taps. "Are you at the back wall?" Perkins called. "Yes," a trembling voice replied. Givens nodded at Perkins and spun into the doorway, rifle pointed into the room. When no shots rang out, Perkins popped around behind his partner, who was already walking into the room. 2 security guards stood with their backs up against a heavy metal desk, hands raised. Givens moved forward and took the left side of the room, rifle pointed more toward the floor than at the men. Perkins took up position on the right and held his rifle toward the ceiling. The 2 guards' eyes were wide and their mouths set in grim, terrified lines. "I'm Sergeant Perkins." He gestured toward his partner. "That's Givens. Who are you?" The larger man on the left cleared his throat, his hands shivering with fear. "I'm Max. I'm in charge." Givens grunted but said nothing. Perkins tried not to smile. The guard gestured to the other man. "He's Carter, my second." Perkins turned and gently closed the door. He locked it and then faced the men. "You can drop your hands, but if you reach for a weapon, we'll put you down, understood?" The 2 guards nodded. Perkins tapped his mic. "Alpha to boss, over." "Go, Alpha." "Have found the security office. We have 2 civilians. I repeat, 2 security guards in the office. Over." "Understood, Alpha. Find out the situation and report back." "Over." "Acknowledged. Alpha out." He blew a sigh through his teeth. The massive adrenaline dump that had sent his nerves into overdrive was departing. A period of exhaustion would follow. With any luck, both he and Givens would be able to take a little bit of a rest before they had to go back at it. But if Perkins was asked, he sure as shit didn't want to go back out of the room and into the darkness. "Are you here to save us?" Carter asked. Perkins and Givens exchanged a glance. "Save you from what?" Perkins asked. "From that thing!" Max yelled. Givens, normally averse to speech, narrowed his eyes and spoke in a clear, growling drawl. "What thing, sir?" Carter started to cry. Max looked as though he was about to join him. "We have video," Max said. "That's what I wanted to hear," Givens said. "Carter, get your shit together," Max said as he wiped his eyes. The young guard looked at his boss and sniffled. "Show them." Without saying a word, Carter moved to a workstation with a large LCD screen. He touched a button on the keyboard, and the screen lit up. "What's up with the lights?" Perkins asked. Max frowned. "Power's out. Whole goddamn floor." Givens pointed at the computer. "Then how's that working?" "We have our own generator," Carter said, his fingers tapping on the keys. "We're on a separate circuit from the rest of the building." He swiped his eyes. Perkins was sure the man was going to cry again, but didn't. "We got video from the ER." He looked up at Perkins. Carter's mouth twitched. "Really fucking glad you're here." Perkins didn't feel like smiling, even though he knew it would put the 20-something at ease. Probably his boss, too. Neither of them looked like they were much past the age to drink. Before he had a chance to react, the kid looked down at the monitor again, his expression little more than stone. The screen went black, and then came back with 4 separate camera views. The top left showed the entrance to the ER. The top right displayed the hallway to the trauma theaters. The 2 on the bottom displayed the ER room and the waiting room. The guard pushed a dial on the console. The screens flashed and blurred as he went back in time. The images went by too fast for Perkins to make much out of them, the timestamps in their corners fluttering backward at insane speeds. "Here we go," Carter said, and tapped the spacebar. The camera view stabilized. The view of the ER entrance showed the intact tunnel swaying in the wind. Givens walked closer, but Perkins ignored him. He was too busy watching the carnage on the screen. The view of the ER ward showed a patient on a stainless steel table, the sheet stained with red, yellow, and something dark. The 3 moon-suited doctors suddenly panicked. The video had no sound to go along with it, but Perkins was pretty sure the patient had flatlined. When they pulled back the sheet, he took a step back. Her flesh looked rotted, creamy. As far as Perkins was concerned, death would be a better state of being. And then it happened. The doctors tried to revive her, and then a monster burst from her chest. "Jesus," Givens whispered. Perkins stood, mouth agape, as the black thing consumed one doctor after another. A patient fled the room. Perkins watched as he disappeared from one camera view and then ran through the tunnel and out into the rain. An HPD officer went into the tunnel to the ER and disappeared in a blind spot. Seconds later, something impossibly black erupted through the tunnel and into the waiting area. The squat creature's multi-jointed legs dug into the tile while it dragged part of its body across the floor behind it. That part looked like liquid, shimmering and alive liquid. It rounded the corner and into the trauma hallway. Perkins watched the two CDC doctors escape into the trauma center entrance. The creature waved eye stalks and smacked its tentacles into the glass walls. They held. After a moment or two, the black monstrosity continued down the hallway and disappeared from view. "Fuck me," Perkins whispered. Carter looked back at him. "Yeah," he giggled. His face reddened as he laughed. He sounded half hysterical. "Shut up, Carter," Max said. "Show them the rest." "I was getting to it." Carter turned back around to the keyboard, hit a few keys, and the four-way view of the ER disappeared. 4 new rectangles appeared, each showing a portion of the area Perkins and Givens had walked through to get to the security office. With the lights on, Perkins barely recognized the floor. The tile had been recently mopped, but was stained in places and a little grungy. Chairs, couches, and tables all sat in the main foyer in pristine condition. The large room he and Givens had descended into was obviously a combination storage/electrical area. The floor was covered with grease and oil stains, but mostly clean and well kept. Lit control panels flashed with green and yellow lights. "And now," Carter said, "take a look at this." He punched a key and the timestamps rolled forward. For a moment nothing happened, and then the view of the machinery room went haywire. Wood, particle board, cables, and dust exploded downward, covering the space between the 2 large steel power generators. The debris hadn't even settled before a large black shape smashed down into the floor. It had no eye stalks, no appendages. It was just a black, gelatinous blob that practically bounced when it hit the floor. Perkins watched in horrified fascination as the thing shook like jostled pudding. Then something extruded from its top. An eye stalk. Then another. And another. Then came the hooked tentacles. The thing pushed itself through the gap between the machines, the floor smoking where it touched. The creature's tentacles flashed sideways, in anger or probing, he wasn't sure. Its hooks raked the backs of the generators, and then the lights went out. The screens went black, and then a few emergency lights kicked on. The views on the screen slowly rendered the world in shadows. The one facing the foyer flickered slightly as something moved toward it. The shape was difficult to make out, but it was easy to see its tentacles slashing the air. They were little more than shadowy swipes across the screen, but Perkins' mind filled in the details. He wished they had audio, and then reconsidered. Perkins wasn't sure he wanted to hear the sounds of its limbs clicking on the tile, or the sound it made when it moved. Did it growl? Did it moan in some alien voice they'd never translate? What the fuck kind of movie monster bullshit was this? The large shadow continued moving until it found the furniture. The detail was far from clear, but the damned thing seemed to hunch over them. "Dragged its ass in," Givens said. Perkins looked back at him. "What?" His partner pointed to the screen. "See that there? That big shadow? That's the bulbous end it dragged through the hallways upstairs. I think that's what eats things." "You mean dissolving," Max said with a shiver. The 2 SWAT team members stared at him. "Just like it did with the doctors in the ER, and the cops, and the wood and walls." Perkins nodded to himself. The security guard was making sense. He hadn't even considered that, but it explained the hole in the floor upstairs. It also explained the strange marks and the reason the tile and concrete shined. The damn thing was absorbing nearly everything it touched. He dragged his eyes back to the screen. The shadow was gone. "Shit," Perkins said. "Where'd it go?" Max took a deep breath and then slowly exhaled. "To us." Givens and Perkins exchanged a glance. The Kentuckian spoke. "What do you mean by that?" "We heard it," Max said. "We heard it moving through the floor like goddamned Godzilla. Did you see that camera outside?" "Yes," Givens said. "Well, we got a real good shot of it before it left the hallway and out of sight." Carter tapped another key and the screen changed again. A camera view showed the hallway outside the security office. Perkins leaned forward. A single security light cast a dim glow, just bright enough to chase away the shadows outside the door. Further down the hallway, they saw the darkness jitter and dissipate into a shape. The thing was larger than it had been before. Perkins was sure of it. It came down the hallway in a lurching walk, 3 multi-jointed legs stabbing out and dragging its bulky body behind it. Perkins wasn't sure if it was just his imagination, but the floor seemed to steam and smoke where the back of its body came in contact. The hulking thing moved closer to the door. Now it was in full view of the camera, and the light seemed to slide off the creature's surface. The eye stalks, 5 of them, waved, the orbs atop them spinning in jerky 360s. A large maw appeared in the creature's center, impossibly black rows of jagged teeth glistening in the dim light. The creature's tentacles reached forward and slashed out of the camera's view. But it was clear it was trying to get through the door and at the morsels inside. After a moment, the creature stepped back from the door and crawled down the adjoining hallway and out of sight. "Jesus," Perkins whispered. "You're here to save us, right?" Carter asked, his voice shuddering with fear. Perkins glanced at Givens. The Kentuckian shrugged with his eyes. "We're here to keep you safe," Perkins said. "Or die trying."